In the deep, hushed hours of the American night, when the everyday clamor of life softens into a gentle hum, and the moon casts its long, knowing shadows across our towns and landscapes, there exists a peculiar stillness. It's in these moments that the past often feels closer, its echoes more distinct, its stories more vivid. We are, as a people, endlessly fascinated by what lingers, by the indelible marks left by lives lived and forgotten, by moments of profound joy and agonizing sorrow. This fascination draws us, time and again, to the idea that some events, some emotions, are so potent they refuse to simply fade into history. They persist, manifesting as midnight whispers from the past, true haunting accounts that gently, yet insistently, remind us that not everything can be explained by science or logic alone. These are the narratives that challenge our understanding, that make us question the boundaries of existence, and that leave us with a quiet, lingering sense of wonder and perhaps a touch of comforting unease. Tonight, we will open our ears to these whispers, sharing tales of ordinary Americans who encountered the extraordinary, stories that come not from fiction, but from the unsettling tapestry of real experience passed down through generations, still resonating in the quiet corners of our collective memory. Let us begin our journey with a story from the heartland, a place where vast prairies meet unassuming small towns, and where history often lies buried just beneath the surface. This is the account of Sarah, a young woman who, along with her husband Mark, purchased a charming, albeit slightly dilapidated, farmhouse outside of Lawrence, Kansas. It was an old place, built in the late 1800s, with wide plank floors, tall windows, and a sprawling porch that overlooked acres of cornfields. Sarah, an aspiring artist, saw only its potential, its rustic beauty, and the quiet solitude it offered for her creative pursuits. Mark, a history buff, was drawn to its age and the stories he imagined it could tell. The first few months were a whirlwind of renovations, painting walls, sanding floors, and unearthing forgotten treasures from the attic. The house creaked, as old houses do, and the wind sometimes howled through the eaves, making the windows rattle. Sarah and Mark attributed every strange sound to the charming quirks of their new, ancient home. They were happy, busy, and blissfully unaware of the silent observer who, they would soon discover, shared their living space. It began subtly, as these things often do. Sarah would be painting in her sunlit studio, located in the old dining room, and would catch a fleeting glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision, a shadow darting across the hall, a flicker of white in the doorway. When she looked directly, there was nothing. She dismissed it as her eyes playing tricks, or perhaps a trick of the light. Then objects started to move. A teacup on the kitchen counter would be found in the sink. A book left on the nightstand would turn up on the living room coffee table. They initially blamed each other, playful accusations quickly turning into mild frustration, as neither could recall moving the items. One evening, as Mark was reading in his favorite armchair and Sarah was sketching, a distinct sound reached them from upstairs. It was a soft, rhythmic thumping, like a small ball being bounced on the wooden floor, followed by a faint, childish giggle. They both froze, looking at each other. They had no children and no one else was in the house. Mark, ever the rationalist, went upstairs to investigate. He checked every room, every closet, even under the beds. Nothing. The entire upstairs was silent, still, and completely empty. When he returned downstairs, Sarah looked at him, her face pale. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she whispered. He nodded, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Over the next few weeks, the activity escalated. The thumping and giggling became more frequent, always seeming to come from the second bedroom, which they used as a guest room. Doors would gently open and close on their own. The faint scent of lavender, a smell neither of them used, would occasionally waft through the house, strong and distinct, only to dissipate moments later. Sarah began to feel a pervasive sense of being watched, a light, almost playful presence that accompanied her as she moved through the house. It wasn't menacing, not exactly, but it was undeniably there. One afternoon, Sarah was dusting in the living room, a quiet, peaceful space filled with natural light. She was alone. Suddenly, a distinct whisper floated past her ear. It was a soft, feminine voice, very close, almost like someone breathing a word directly beside her. She couldn't make out the word, but the intention felt gentle, almost curious. She dropped her duster, her heart hammering. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. No reply, just the sudden, profound silence of the old farmhouse. Shaken, Sarah began to research the house's history. She visited the local historical society, pored over old newspaper archives, and spoke to elderly residents who remembered the farm. She discovered that the house had belonged to the Miller family for generations. And tragically, in the early 1930s, the Miller's young daughter, a sweet little girl named Lily, had died of scarlet fever in the second bedroom, the very room where Sarah and Mark heard the thumping and giggling. Lily's mother, distraught, had reportedly used lavender to soothe her fever. Sarah felt a profound sadness wash over her. It wasn't a malevolent entity. It was a child, still playing, still lingering, perhaps unaware of her own passing, or simply too attached to the only home she had ever known. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah and Mark's fear began to transform into a gentle empathy. They started leaving small toys in the guest room, little trinkets they thought a child might enjoy, and in return the activity subtly changed. The noises became less startling, more like background sounds. The lavender scent became a comforting presence. Sometimes, Sarah would return to her studio to find her art supplies subtly rearranged. A small brush moved, or a stray paint dot where it hadn't been before, as if Lily was curiously exploring her new art. One evening, as Sarah played a lullaby on her phone, a quiet hum seemed to join the melody, a faint, almost childlike hum, weaving through the music before gently fading into silence. The old farmhouse, once merely a structure, became a shared space, a quiet sanctuary where the past and present coexisted, a testament to the enduring, innocent whispers of a child who found solace in her home, even from beyond. Now let us journey from the open fields of Kansas to the bustling, historic streets of Boston, Massachusetts, a city where every brick and cobblestone seems to hold a tale of generations past. Our next account takes us to an old brownstone in Beacon Hill, a charming, albeit tightly packed, neighborhood known for its gas lamps and architectural grandeur. This is where David, a young professional working in finance, moved after accepting a new job in the city. He was excited by the history of the area, the proximity to the Freedom Trail, and the idea of living in a building that had stood for well over a century. The brownstone apartment he rented was on the third floor, with high ceilings, intricate crown molding, and large bay windows that overlooked the quaint, narrow street. David was a pragmatist, a man who dealt in numbers and observable facts. He had no belief in ghosts or the supernatural, attributing such tales to folklore and overactive imaginations. His first few weeks in the apartment were peaceful, if a little solitary. He worked long hours, often returning home late, his mind usually consumed by the complexities of the stock market. But then, as the crisp autumn nights began to draw in, he started to notice peculiar things. It started with footsteps, soft, rhythmic steps always coming from the hallway outside his apartment door. He would be in his living room, watching TV, and he'd distinctly hear the sound of someone walking past, pausing, and then continuing. He assumed it was his neighbors, but the footsteps had a peculiar, almost shuffling quality, and they seemed to happen at odd hours, long after his neighbors would have settled down for the night. He would often open his door to check, only to find the hallway completely empty, the gas lamps casting their eerie glow on undisturbed silence. Then came the voices. Faint, indistinct murmurs like a conversation happening just on the other side of a thin wall. He would sometimes wake in the dead of night, roused by what sounded like hushed whispers, coming from the living room or even from his own bedroom. He tried to rationalize it away, thinking it was sound bleeding through from a neighboring apartment, but the whispers often sounded too close, too internal, and never seemed to correlate with any noise from the adjacent units. He would get up, check the rooms, find them empty, and return to bed, his mind racing, a subtle seed of unease beginning to sprout. One evening, David was preparing dinner in his small galley kitchen. He had a radio playing softly, a classical music station. Suddenly, the radio began to flicker, the music cutting in and out, replaced by static. He frowned, assuming it was a poor signal. As he reached to adjust the dial, the music suddenly stopped completely, and a clear, distinct sigh echoed from the radio's speaker, a long, weary exhalation that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't static, it was a human sound. He stared at the radio, his hand frozen in midair. After a moment, the music flickered back on, as if nothing had happened. David, despite his rational nature, was deeply unsettled. He began to feel a pervasive sense of being observed, a heavy, almost mournful presence that seemed to linger in his apartment, particularly in the hallway and the living room. He started researching the history of his specific brownstone, delving into old property records and historical archives. He discovered that in the mid-19th century, the building had been a boarding house. One particular tenant, a young man named Edward Sterling, a sailor who had lost his fortune and his ship, had taken his own life in David's very apartment, reportedly due to overwhelming grief and despair. The records indicated that Edward was a quiet, melancholy man, known for packing the halls in the dead of night and often sighing deeply when he thought he was alone. A profound sadness washed over David as he read about Edward. The footsteps, the whispers, the mournful sigh from the radio, they all coalesced into a chillingly coherent picture. It wasn't some malevolent entity. It was a lost soul, forever trapped in a cycle of grief and regret, replaying the moments of his despair within the very walls that had witnessed his last days. David began to view his apartment differently. It was no longer just a rental. It was a shared space, a quiet stage for a lingering tragedy. He started leaving a small, flickering lead candle on his coffee table at night, a subtle gesture of companionship, a silent acknowledgement of Edward's presence. Sometimes he would wake to find the candle inexplicably off or subtly moved, and he would simply turn it back on, a quiet conversation across the veil. The brownstone in Beacon Hill continues to stand, elegant and historic, but for David, it is also a somber testament to a past that never truly departs, its midnight whispers carrying the quiet, melancholy echoes of Edward Sterling's enduring sorrow. And as the quiet rhythms of Beacon Hill settle once more, allowing the story of Edward Sterling to gently recede, our narrative now carries us far from the bustling streets of Boston into the rugged, untamed beauty of the American West. Here, amidst towering red rock formations and vast, silent deserts, lies a different kind of history, one shaped by pioneers, prospectors, and the often brutal realities of frontier life. Our next true haunting account comes from a desolate stretch of road winding through the high desert mountains of Nevada, near the old mining town of Virginia City, a place that once pulsed with the frenetic energy of the Comstock Lode, and now echoes with its turbulent past. This is the story of Carter, a solo long-haul truck driver, whose life on the open road brought her face to face with a persistent, chilling whisper from beyond. Was a woman of steely nerves and practical disposition. Her days were spent traversing thousands of miles, her only companions the drone of her engine and the endless vistas of the American landscape. She scoffed at ghost stories, believing that the true terrors of the road lay in bad weather, mechanical failures, or dangerous drivers, not spectral phenomena. Yet an isolated stretch of Nevada State Route 341, leading into Virginia City, would soon challenge every one of her deeply held beliefs. This particular road is infamous locally for its sharp curves, steep grades, and a history of tragic accidents. But beyond the mundane dangers, there were whispers among truckers, hushed tales of strange encounters on moonless nights, of who appeared and vanished, and of a palpable sense of unease that settled over the stretch of asphalt known simply as the Devil's Curve. Being pragmatic, dismissed these as superstitious trucker lore, the product of too many solitary hours and too much caffeine. It was on a particularly dark, starless night, with no other vehicles on the road for miles, that first encountered something she couldn't explain. She was navigating a series of sharp hairpin turns, her powerful truck rumbling steadily, when her headlights caught a figure standing by the side of the road just ahead. It was a woman, dressed in what appeared to be old-fashioned clothing, a long, dark dress, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. She was holding a small, old-fashioned valise, and seemed to be desperately trying to flag down. Despite her general caution, felt a pang of sympathy. This was a dangerous, desolate stretch. No one should be out here alone. She slowed her rig, preparing to offer a ride. But as she drew closer, something felt profoundly wrong. The woman didn't move towards the truck. She simply stood there, utterly still, her posture rigid, facing away from the road, staring into the darkness of the desert. And then, as headlights fully illuminated her, the figure began to subtly shimmer, to ripple at the edges, almost like heat rising from the pavement. Slammed on her brakes, her heart leaping into her throat, the woman, without turning, without moving, simply dissolved. Not vanished into thin air, but slowly, almost deliberately, became transparent, then faded entirely, leaving nothing but the empty roadside and the looming darkness of the desert. Sat there, engine idling, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She told herself it was fatigue, an optical illusion, the vastness of the desert playing tricks on her mind. She eventually forced herself to continue, her eyes darting frantically to the mirror, half expecting to see the figure reappear. The encounter deeply unsettled her. She started asking other truckers about the area, trying to piece together a rational explanation. That's when she heard about Sarah, a young woman from the late 1800s who had been traveling to Virginia City to meet her, a prospector. She had been robbed and murdered on that very stretch of road, her body never fully recovered, her valise left behind. The legend said she still waited, forever trying to complete her journey, sometimes seen by travelers on lonely nights. After that first encounter, started to experience other phenomena on that same road. Her radio would suddenly switch to static, or sometimes a faint waltz, an old-fashioned tune that would play for a few moments before fading. Her CB radio, usually a cacophony of trucker chatter, would go completely silent. And sometimes, usually when she was alone in the deepest part of the night, she would hear it, a soft, almost mournful whisper, right next to her ear, a breathy, indistinct sound that seemed to carry an immense weight of sorrow and longing. It never formed words she could understand, but the emotion was clear, a quiet echo of Sarah's unending despair. One night, as she was once again driving through the Devil's Curve, listening to the Phantom Waltz on her radio, had a powerful, almost overwhelming sensation of coldness in the cab, a chill that penetrated her heavy jacket. And then she saw it in her peripheral vision, a shimmering outline of a woman sitting in the passenger seat, almost transparent, yet undeniably there. The figure didn't look at her. She simply gazed out the windshield, her ghostly form slightly hunched, as if burdened by an unseen weight. For the first time in her life, was truly terrified but also strangely empathetic. She felt the profound sadness emanating from the apparition, a silent plea for connection, for an end to her endless waiting. Didn't speak. She just drove, the phantom figure beside her, the melancholy waltz playing softly on the radio. After what felt like an eternity, as the lights of Virginia City finally appeared in the distance, the figure slowly, gracefully faded from view, leaving behind only the pervasive coldness and a lingering scent of dust and old roses. Knew then that Sarah's journey was not a tale, but a real, persistent whisper from the past, forever trapped on that desolate road. She still drives that route, her truck rumbling through the high desert, and sometimes on those dark, lonely nights, she still feels the cold, hears the waltz, and senses the quiet, sorrowful presence beside her. She doesn't fear it anymore. Instead, she offers a silent nod of acknowledgement, a quiet understanding of the enduring human spirit, even when it's bound to a lonely stretch of asphalt, forever waiting. Finally, our last journey for this night takes us to a place that combines the solemnity of history with the vibrant life of a modern city, the historic district of Charleston, South Carolina. Here, amidst charming cobblestone streets, grand antebellum homes, and ancient graveyards, the whispers of the past are not just felt, but often seen and heard with startling clarity. This is the true haunting account of Mr. Edward, a respected tour guide who specialized in Charleston's rich, often dark, history, and whose skeptical nature was irrevocably altered by a specific, lingering presence. Edward was a man who prided himself on his historical accuracy. He told stories of pirates, patriots, and planters, all backed by meticulous research. He would often include the city's famous ghost stories in his tour, but always with a wry smile, presenting them as charming local legends rather than verifiable facts. He believed that the power of suggestion and the romantic atmosphere of Charleston were enough to create the illusion of the supernatural. Yet a particular location on his tour, the old Unitarian Church graveyard, would prove to be the setting for his profound transformation. The Unitarian Church graveyard is an ancient, overgrown cemetery, its crumbling headstones and ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss giving it a distinctly Gothic and mystical atmosphere. It's often referred to as a secret garden, a peaceful, yet undeniably eerie place where history sleeps beneath the tangled roots and decaying stone. Among its many interred, the most famous resident is believed to be a young woman from the mid-1800s who died tragically young, leaving behind a heart broken. The legend says was a beautiful, vivacious woman, and her spirit is still very much attached to her final resting place. Edward had always used the graveyard as a quiet, atmospheric stop on his ghost tour, telling the tales of with a theatrical flair, never truly believing. But then, strange occurrences began to happen to him, specifically within the confines of that ancient cemetery. It started with the scent of jasmine, strong and distinct, appearing out of nowhere, even when no jasmine plants were in bloom nearby. It was a sweet, feminine perfume that would linger for a few moments, usually when he was standing near his unmarked grave, before dissipating into the evening air. Then came the whispers, soft, almost musical, indistinct murmurs that seemed to drift on the breeze, always seeming to originate from the deepest parts of the graveyard, near the oldest, most weathered stones. He'd often catch glimpses of a white, shimmering shape in his peripheral vision, a fleeting figure that would vanish upon direct gaze. His tour participants, usually a mix of believers and skeptics, also began to report similar experiences, turning to him with wide, questioning eyes. One evening, as Edward was leading a particularly large tour group through the graveyard, he was recounting the tale of standing near what was believed to be her burial site. As he spoke, the distinct scent of jasmine suddenly filled the air, strong and undeniable, causing several people in his group to gasp. Then, a single, perfectly formed rose, a deep crimson red, suddenly appeared on the top of a crumbling, moss-covered headstone directly beside him, a headstone that had been bare moments before. There was no one close enough to have placed it there, and it was too perfectly placed to have simply fallen. Edward stared at the rose, his jaw slightly agape, his heart pounding in his chest. His tour group, equally stunned, collectively fell silent. He picked up the rose, its petals soft and velvety, its scent overwhelming. He knew with a sudden, profound certainty that this was not a trick of the light, nor a well-placed prop. This was a direct, undeniable communication from herself. From that night forward, Edward's tour changed. His stories were told with a new reverence, a quiet conviction that resonated deeply with his audience. He often left a single rose on the grave, a silent offering, a gesture of respect to the enduring spirit who had so subtly, yet powerfully, made her presence known. Sometimes late at night, when he was alone in the graveyard preparing for a tour, he would sit near his grave. He would feel the familiar cold spot, smell the jasmine, and listen to the soft, gentle whispers that seemed to carry on the wind, indistinct yet comforting. He no longer feared the unknown. He embraced it. He understood that the midnight whispers from the past were not just tales of sorrow or terror, but often gentle reminders of love that transcends death, of a lingering spirit finding solace in its enduring connection to the living. Charleston, with its historical charm and haunted allure, remains a vibrant testament to its past, its quiet graveyards filled with the soft, persistent whispers of those who continue to share their stories with those who are willing to listen. As the final stars fade and the promise of dawn begins to paint the eastern sky, our journey through these midnight whispers from the past draws to a peaceful close. We have listened to the innocent giggles of Lily in a Kansas farmhouse, felt the melancholy presence of Edward Sterling in a Boston brownstone, witnessed the sorrowful weight of Sarah on a desolate Nevada road, and been touched by the fragrant presence of in a Charleston graveyard. Each of these true haunting accounts, passed down through the quiet chambers of shared experience, serves as a gentle reminder that the fabric of time is perhaps not as rigid as we often perceive it to be. These whispers are not always loud or terrifying. They are often subtle, a faint scent, a fleeting shadow, a sudden chill, a familiar sound from an empty room. But in their very subtlety lies their power, for they challenge our assumptions and invite us to consider the boundless mysteries that lie just beyond our immediate perception. They remind us that human emotions, profound experiences, and unbreakable attachments can leave an indelible imprint on the places we inhabit, creating echoes that resonate long after we are gone. In the quiet depths of the night, when the world around us stills, these real voices from the past emerge, not always to frighten, but often to communicate, to share, and to simply remind us that we are part of a continuous story, a vast, interconnected tapestry of lives and moments that stretch far beyond the boundaries of our present understanding. And as the day now slowly begins to break, let these midnight whispers settle within you, a quiet reflection on the enduring mysteries that weave through our lives, always present, always waiting for us to listen, gently and with an open heart.